So we have two panels. The first one is just to do a quick state of the nation in giving. And the second one, we're going to look at changes, particularly affecting younger givers, the so-called millennial generation. And as I say, I'm going to leap right into it. The first question to Nicole, KCI, philanthropic trends. What are the trends in Canada in giving?
Thank you, Tim, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Yes, I'm delighted to share some of the thoughts that we have at KCI around the trends in giving by Canadians. It's a topic that we've been spending a fair amount of time thinking about. Our president and my colleague Marnie Spears is here, and she and I have a lot of conversations about this. And the reason we have these conversations is because one of the things we do on a regular basis is we ask our clients what's keeping them up at night. What are they most concerned about? What are they worried about? What are they focused on? And invariably, one of the key things that we hear back is that there's a real struggle to grow revenue and a struggle to grow the number of donors giving to those organizations, or even to maintain the number of donors giving to those organizations. So as a result of that, we thought we want to dig into this and really understand what's going on. I want to set the context a little bit with a few numbers, and it's hard sometimes to sort of capture numbers in your head when you hear them spoken. I will point to you that on the table you have our latest edition of Philanthropic Trends Quarterly. And if you want to follow along as I share these numbers with you, it's on page 3. C'est aussi disponible en français.
The report is also available in French.
Of numbers. It's really hard to get a full and accurate picture of what's happening into giving in Canada, because frankly the information just doesn't exist. But let me tell you what we do know. So T3010 filings of charities, some really good news here, that we have seen year over year that based on the filings of charities, charitable revenue, fundraising revenue, has been going up steadily. And in 2014, T3010 filings showed that it was about $21.5 billion that charities said they received through fundraising. CRA data is another spot where we have some information on the giving of Canadians. Every year, CRA releases information around the number of Canadians who have tax-receipted donations, the percent of total tax filers that have tax-receipted donations, and the total value of those gifts. Again, it's a bit of a mixed story here. On the good news front, the total amount that's given by Canadians through tax-receipted donations, with the exception of a couple years after the recession, has been on a steady increase. And in fact, 2015, we passed the $9 billion mark for the first time, so $9.1 billion by giving of Canadians. The not so good news is that we've seen a steady decline in the percent of tax filers who have tax-receipted donations. Mid-90s, 30%, 2015, 21%. So that's sort of the bad news piece of that picture. The other source of information we have about giving by Canadians is the General Social Survey. Probably you know it as the Canadian Survey of Giving, Volunteering, and Participating, done every 3 years, sorry. In 2004, 85% of Canadians reported that they made gifts to charity. That had declined by 2013 to 82%. 3% drop when you factor in growth in population. However, that means 800,000 fewer people declared that they made a gift to charity. So just some stats for you and some numbers to sort of set the context. Want to share with you now, conscious of my 7 minutes, just a few thoughts we have, what we think in terms of observations might be driving some of this. And I want to be really clear that what I'm sharing with you here is there's no judgment associated with it, there's no criticism, it's really just observations. It's sort of holding the mirror up and saying this is what we're seeing. One of the things we're seeing is the changing definition of charity, changing definition of philanthropy. We're seeing it in a few ways. We're seeing the democratization of everything in our lives, and we're seeing the idea of democratizing charity. We don't need anymore, we don't feel we need a charity to necessarily do good. I can decide that I think there's something out there that's happening, and I can set up a fundraising page and I can ask people to support it. So there's an example of we don't necessarily need charity to do good. So there's sort of a democratization element, and there's also a devaluing of expertise that we're seeing again sort of across society, and we're also seeing it in charities. So we're in a bit of an era of do-it-yourself philanthropy, that I don't necessarily need charity to do good. We're also seeing a bit of a blurring of lines. So again, this isn't a good or a bad thing, but what we're seeing is that we're seeing charities that sometimes act more like a business. That's not new. We've always had social enterprises. But we're also seeing business sort of acting a little bit like charity. There's lots of opportunity. We're seeing corporations that have foundations now that make asks of their customers, or we're seeing things built right in, baked right into how they do business, whether it's, one of the best examples I can always think of is Tom's Shoes. You buy a pair of shoes, they give a pair of shoes to someone who needs. Or I was struck by recently, I think it's Honey Nut Cheerios has a campaign called Save the Bees. So you buy a box of Honey Nut Cheerios and you're in fact doing something to save the bees. So there you go. Again, there's a real blurring of lines that's happening. And this is also happening even from a major gift perspective. We were struck by, every year, the Chronicle of Philanthropy, a publication out of the U.S., does a summary of the top fundraising organizations in the U.S. And for the first time ever, Fidelity Charitable Gift Fund was the top fundraiser in the U.S. in 2016. So a real blurring of lines. So changing definitions, the changing Canadian population, we are much less homogeneous than we used to be, and our definitions, again, of giving and philanthropy are also very different. We're also struck by, and this is actually a comment that I remember Bruce McDonald from Imagine Canada made to me, that sometimes it feels like charity and giving and philanthropy is everywhere, and yet on the other hand, and this is a conversation Marnie and I have had, it's also, we're not very intentional about our giving. Marnie said to me once as we were talking about this topic, she said, it's not like people are sitting around in their living room thinking about giving their money away. And it was just one of an offhand comment that she made, and it's just so prescient because it's true. We think about our next vacation, we think about putting money away for some new furniture. We really don't think about being very intentional with our philanthropy. And I know we're going to hear from Bruce and Michelle Benoit about the Personal Philanthropy Project, and you're going to hear that even with Canadians of higher net worth, we're still in a place where there's not a lot of sort of thought and intention. So just a few trends to share with you. I want to echo that what the Governor General just said, and be also very clear that we think we're in a good place. We do not believe that Canadians are any less generous than they used to be, and we're going to hear from Conrad Sauvé from the Red Cross, and you need look no further than the response Canadians had to the Fort McMurray fire as an example of that generosity. However, at the same time, I think we need to continue to be vigilant, and as the Governor General just said, it is about not being happy with the status quo. It's about recognizing that these things are happening and figuring out how we integrate them and how we change the way we do things. Two pieces that I think are really important. One is continuing to hammer home the relevance of charities and the charitable sector in continuing to create communities that thrive and are healthy. And the second piece is creating a culture, cultivating an understanding and a real philanthropic literacy in this country about the need for Canadians to support charities, again, in meaningful ways that maybe go beyond sort of liking things on Facebook. So just a few thoughts to start off our conversation.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you for being so punctual. That gentle music in the background was just a hint. Alors ça, il y avait des éléments.
There were very interesting elements in what you said. That's what's happening generally in the country. Now, Liliana, in the case of Quebec, is it the same thing? And about do-it-yourself philanthropy, this is quite a challenge for organizations like Centraide, which is an expert about the needs of the community. Is there really music after 7 minutes? My God. Yes, in the case of Quebec, things are different. We have a philanthropic culture that comes from our history, our Catholic past, and our community solidarity. We have a state that supports the population in general, and we have social policies, social programs, and we still believe very strongly that it's the responsibility of the state that makes us the most taxed citizens, but that brings also an egalitarian society. But we're full of contradictions. We have to recognize that. Think about the Cracking the Quebec Code. It's a book I recommend to you. It shows that we're the province where we consider ourselves to be very strong believers, but we don't practice our religion. Education is seen as something very important, and the dues for universities are very low. But our young drop out of high school in great numbers, and the collective dream of Quebec is to eliminate poverty. However, according to the CRA, the median donation of Quebec is not very high compared to Canada, and so we have to ask ourselves questions about why Canadian Quebecers behave that way. I have documents from the Mallet Institute where we think collectively about these issues. Have a look at that publication. It's very interesting. There are many hypotheses. The one about religion, about the intervention of the state, but also from the fact that we have collective movements. Remember the Printemps Érable. But if we took the data coming from the rest of Canada about everything that's given to religious charities, that represents 40% of all the sums, I think things will be fairly the same for Quebec. These philanthropy trends in Quebec and Canada are about the same. Of course, we're affected by the changes in generations. Young people, we know, give like they consume. Women will give less than men, even if 50% of women give 50% of men. For cultural communities, first generations will send money to the country of origin. I'm a good example of what happens at the second generation. Then we start giving to the community you live in. Working mobility affects us. The fact also that millennials have more loyalty to their Facebook friends, to baby boomers who have their loyalty towards their employer. Massive retirement means that baby boomers have their revenues decrease. Also in Quebec, we begin to feel what's happening in the US, where I was 2 weeks ago, about the privatization of the sector with actors like FrontStream or others that invade our territory, donor advised funds like Fidelity or Mackenzie, social funding that is seen more and more in Quebec, democratization of philanthropy, the importance of social media, crowd fundraising. All these factors create an upheaval in our environment, but it belongs to us to adapt to that. Centraide United Way is the tool that the collectivity gave to itself to answer the needs of its people in the community. In Quebec, all the Centraide organizations chose to focus on the fight against poverty and social exclusion. In Montreal, this makes us a social expert in the field. Thanks to that, we were able to develop partnerships with the Chagnon Foundation, for instance, and 8 other foundations. We created the Impact Collective Project with the Montreal Coalition of Neighborhoods to speed up changes and transformation within our neighborhoods to fight poverty, which is sometimes a little too structural, unfortunately. This new model of collaborative philanthropy, for which we have $22 million over 5 years, is quite new, and we learn from it every day. Within a year, this new approach allowed us at Centraide to work for Syrian refugees. The Red Cross does that also, but also to react to the tragic events that happened in Quebec City last January. 22 financial institutions created together the Inclusion Fund and gave to Centraide, commissioned Centraide to make sure that our young people in our schools are open to diversity. At work, and that's the same in Canada, said that, Your Excellency. What's important is that we share a story. People have to know what's the impact of their donations, how they transform their community, and how they can build helping communities. So we created Génération C so that young millennials can have fun making donations. We have to make sure that women will get together to collectively impact the lives of other women, and we try to innovate that way as much as possible.
I have to confess, I forgot to press the start button.
Thanks.
Marina, Canada Helps is itself an innovation that came out of the charitable sector. And I can remember when it started, it was regarded by many people as a huge gamble. So how has technology changed the way Canadians are giving?
Well, I think someone said that the transformation to our dependence on digital infrastructure and digital data is complete, and I would say that that's correct. When I look at the rapidly evolving technology and how it's impacted fundraising, and I mean, it's a very complex, very evolving field with a lot of blurring between different entities and different, I think fundamentally, structurally different levers. We work with a lot of small charities. Our platform is used by over 17,000 of small Canadian charities, and most Canadian charities are small. So one of the things that I worry about when I go and visit these charities, I really worry about their capacity, because for the most part, they really have no capacity. But their capacity to actually understand the impact of the evolving technologies and harness it is something that I think will become absolutely critical. And to be honest, like I look at it and I wonder how many of them will survive, because everything that we talked about is true. And I'm to talk about crowdfunding. So crowdfunding, and I'm not talking about person-to-person fundraising here. I'm specifically talking about crowdfunding. Crowdfunding has absolutely exploded. It's all for business platforms. I've been in business for many years. I've never seen a segment or a new market that emerge and becomes a multi-billion-dollar market overnight. That has just not happened. When I look at GoFundMe, for example, which is the largest they call it personal causes, online personal causes fundraising platform. Now they have medical fundraising as well for people who cannot pay their medical bills. They got funded in 2010. They're heavily VC-backed. They have raised close to $4 billion. Which business can say that? Like, it's pretty crazy. But through 25 million donors, and just recently they acquired another large crowdfunding platform called CrowdRise in the States, who is also heavily VC-backed, who last year generated close to $200 million. This is also a business that only started a few years ago. So overall, my data from 2014 says that crowdfunding was a $35 billion market globally and $17 billion market in North America. And the World Bank is estimated that by 2020, which is not far, the crowdfunding would hit $100 billion, growing in Asia, in Europe, in Eastern Europe, I would say especially maybe in countries or areas that do not have a strong charitable structure. And there are zillions of platforms. In North America alone, there is close to 400 platforms. This is from like 2 years ago. Globally, there are thousands of platforms. So the CEO of GoFundMe will say that, he doesn't think that all the money that is pouring into personal causes through his platform has replaced charitable giving, that it's really expanded the pot, but it's really created a layer of the internet that is becoming very common. Now, I was once a publisher of award-winning magazines, Canadian magazines, and when the internet came about, and one thing I can tell you is that the change does not care what the incumbent or what the people who were the status quo really think about it, right? Because if somebody told me that journalism as I knew it would all but disappear today, at that time I would say no. That's just not possible. That's just not going to happen. So there is something interesting about a change. I personally think that crowdfunding is here to stay, and it's really driven by a few things that have been mentioned. One of them that I think is significant is that the online giving in itself is set to become a dominant method of giving within the next several years. So right now, online giving, again, I don't have specific Canadian stats, but in North America it's about 26%. A subset of that is mobile and smartphones. We see on Canada Helps that almost quarter of all donations, which currently are $150 million a year, come through mobile phones. So the online is growing faster than the overall giving is growing, and that's going to continue. So it will become a dominant method of giving. The second one is the younger people, the millennials, and we talked about that. But one fundamental structural thing about them is that they really are about lateral and direct distribution of influence, not institutional, not kind of coming from. And it's very true that they are the generation, well, first of all, that will be very powerful and will constitute more than a half of Canadian workforce by 2020. But they really are the generation that is interested in making the world a better place. They're interested in contributing, but they're not necessarily, and they're very much interested in causes, not charities, not institutions. Really, I know this is a cynical word to use in this context, but a whole merchandising layer of what charities will have to change to really conform to this. So they're interested in causes. Do they really care if the cause is procured or managed by a charity or a social enterprise or their friend or somebody else or a for-profit? Not so much. Certainly not as much as we do. I have two sons who are millennials, and they don't really understand the not-for-profit, the for-profit. For them, it really doesn't have the same relevance that it has to me. So I see a lots of, and these are digital natives. These are the people who have grown in the social network environment. So for them, it's really about what can I react to compulsively right now, and what can I share compulsively right now? So the combination of online, e-commerce, compulsive sharing that these platforms enable, that they're, by the way, very much used to. That's how they live. I think will really all contribute to, this continue to be a very interesting and huge, very lucrative space. Again, these are all for-profit players that charge a lot. Lots of people are getting rich on the back of personal philanthropy. I mean, it's just a hugely lucrative space, which is also why VC money is pouring in. Everybody's launching a platform. Technology is very accessible. We have a fundraising platform as a charity. I wish I can compete with some of these guys. I don't have the VC backing. I don't have, massive investment in technology that I can do. But we have a decent fundraising platform, and it has grown as well. It's now about 10% of everything we do, and it's been growing, again, year over year. So it is, very much about influence and peer-to-peer. And I think somebody said it's about my friend is asking me. It's not about charity asking me. It's a different world, and I think it's staying. I think it's staying. I mean, we can all say, this is so paradoxical because people are concerned about effectiveness and they're concerned about impact, and yet they're giving money on these platforms. Are they crazy? I actually had a client, a small animal rescue shelter from North Ontario, who called me crying and said, Marina, I made a big mistake. Instead of using your platform, I went to GoFundMe. And she goes, and now I don't know where my money is, and nobody's returning my calls, and I don't know when will it come to me. And I'm like, yep, yeah. I mean, right? So that's kind of, that's my point of view, certainly.
Thank you. So that's a sobering insight. We go to Conrad, La Croix-Rouge. You had a nice entry from Nicole. You're living the front line of this in a sense. And you've had a remarkable experience last year. Can you tell us a little bit about how the Red Cross is adjusting to this new world?
Thanks, Tim. Yes, I think there's a number of things we're talking about that have come together. If we look at the Fort McMurray evacuation. I'll talk to you a little bit about the event, a little bit also about how the Red Cross reorganized itself, because I think we see the Red Cross responding, but we don't see what was behind all of that. And of course, technology, we've talked a lot about technology as a game changer in terms of this particular operation. I'm just back from Fort McMurray, actually. You know, the evacuation, the total evacuation of a Canadian city, we hadn't seen that, moved Canadians the same way we were moved to give generously internationally. We're moved to support fellow Canadians. And if you go to Fort McMurray, everybody has a story of their evacuation. You know, everybody was told within 2 hours to leave, pick up what you could and leave. And nobody knew when they were coming back or what would be there when they would come back. One of the big changes here, I'm just going to back up a little bit. I mean, the Canadian Red Cross, we've taken on a big change in terms of our own structures and questioning ourselves in terms of how we're structured. And is the way we're structured responding to the needs of people, or are we too focused on our inside structures? And we created really a vision of creating one organization across the country. We're always one organization, but we were built on local branches, regional structures, provincial structures, and national structures. Was that the best way to serve Canadians in need? And we restructured to create an interoperable, with more depth in terms of our expertise, at the same time as we kept regional presence. I'm going to tell you how that came into play in this sense. Now, at the Red Cross, we always did registration. That's one of the key things. It's part of our history. When people evacuate, we register them at the shelter, and we create a registry, basically, and we know where people are. Fort McMurray wasn't about Fort McMurray in the response, because nobody was in Fort McMurray. People left throughout Alberta. They left mostly, a lot of them left to the Maritimes. They went back home. About 5,000 of the 90,000 went to the shelter in Edmonton, but everybody else was everywhere. And one of the initial game changers from the beginning is the province asked everybody to register with the Red Cross, which we normally do. We activated 13 call centers. We registered, those 13 call centers were all around the country. We registered 90,000 people. We received 174,000 calls to our call centers in the first weeks from the evacuees of Fort McMurray, to give you a bit of the size of that. Now, of course, on the other side, the fundraising was activated. We're used to doing that. And the motions of giving, the motivations are the same, but it's how do you capture that moment at that scale, which is different. In the first week, we did a press conference after 1 week. We had raised close to $50 million. What were the needs of those evacuees at that time? They needed money from everywhere in the country. And we did a email cash transfer, which was an innovation. We didn't do that by ourselves. I had to reach the Vice President Treasury of the Royal Bank at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night to see if he could do a $50 million cash transfer to 80,000 people. And he said, well, we've never done that, but I think we could do it. But that was our only option, and otherwise we couldn't reach all these people. They put a team of 12 on the ground, and they okayed it. We did the biggest cash transfer, not only in the Canadian history, but in the world history. Nobody has transferred $50 million cash. So I think when you look at the innovations, you have to deliver in terms immediately on how you're going to help people. The change of behaviors are important as well. Just to give you an idea, we had a rise in social media of 6,000% in those first days. We had 40 staff and volunteers full-time on social media. And social media as a way to communicate, as a way to reduce tensions, fix issues is a reality. And I think one of the changes of the new generation coming up, and we were talking about that yesterday, is that we get, once in a while, I get donors that are not happy. Our generation, they write a letter to me, and you get a lot of those letters. The younger people don't write letters. They post on social media, and some of them have 10, 20,000 friends, and they say they're not happy with that. or they're not happy with what you're doing, this is the part of the change. So we have to go out to them, fix the problem, and understand where the multipliers are. So those are some of the main aspects. Text to donate, we had 250,000 text to donate, so they reacted the same way. When we talk about the encouraging sides of giving, we're very touched. I mean, Canadians donate from everywhere. I didn't mention it, but about 185 million came in from individual donations. That was matched by, which was the matching giving program, 100 million from the federal government and 30 million from the province of Alberta. We got a $5,000 check from Attawapiskat, where we've been working, which was very moving. And we had a Syrian family that donated their first month allocation, which is also very telling in terms of the giving patterns. Now, we understand, and I think we look at the change, we understand at the Red Cross that Canadians are not necessarily giving to the Red Cross, but they're giving through the Red Cross for the people of Fort McMurray. So we set up a $50 million fund for local community organizations. And we did not create a new structure there. We're working with United Way, with First Nations, and with the corporate sector of Fort McMurray in a committee to look at that. But we needed to set that up very fast. The majority of funds are transferred directly to the people affected, but also we created a $30 million fund for small businesses. They're the ones that lose the most in these types of events, and they're part of the fabric of that community. So I think we're living a lot of what we're talking about, but I think the challenges, and somebody was saying, yes, I mean, they could give through Facebook, they could choose to give otherwise. Are we structured in our organization to be able to ramp up, to capture that moment, and to deliver in the community? Because you have to set up also the whole support structure to the community within weeks, and everything's been done online. So the support to small businesses, we have to create the platform. We have to do that within 2 weeks. At the same time as your giving or your support structure has to be perceived as equitable in the community in terms of why you're helping some people, to what extent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a very challenging moment, but at the same time, we saw the same response. But the ability to scale up, you need to be prepared for that ability to scale up and to respond to the needs. And of course, again, technology is a main component of that.
Merci, Conrad.
Thank you, Conrad.
The currency we're talking about is cash, money. But actually what all of the panelists have mentioned is a different kind of currency, which is equally important, which is trust. How do organizations keep the trust of people? How does the technology change the ability of people to have trust in the way in which they're giving? So I'm not going to ask this question, I'm going to give you a chance to just perhaps ask each other a question, but then I want to open it up for questions from the people here or people online. So I won't ask each one of you to pose a question, but if there's a pressing thing that you've heard which you want to pursue, let's have just one or two from here. Great self-restraint. In that case, si vous avez des questions?
If you have any question, you can ask them now. And for those of us online, please send your questions to us.
Yes.
Conrad, I was wondering if you could comment on your sense of the impact of the matching contributions from the federal government in Alberta, and at the same time, were there any other private matching contributions that might have accelerated the giving?
Yeah, well, we have some stats in terms of I think we're looking at two things. Yes, the matching program has impacts. Ronan Ryan, who's our head of fundraising here, has a bit of the statistics. I think I don't have all of that, but all the corporate matching has a big impact. We've also measured the trust factor, to Tim's point, of the Red Cross as well, which has another, we had an economist look at that, an additional boost in terms of the matching. But yes, it has a direct impact. But in our area, it's all about, I'm saying capturing the moment. We have a window of a few weeks to activate everything. Our our fundraising was up and running in the after about an hour after the fires, with the full platforms activated, the pages on, et cetera, et cetera. And so we have a window, a very short window.
Somebody else, yes.
Thank you for your wonderful comments. Conrad and Marina, I wanted to pick up on the point of technology and how essential it is to deliver benefit. And the challenges associated, which I think Marina outlined very clearly, and Conrad, how you were so nimble and effective and clearly had done massive pre-planning to get there. I mean, what is the role, what are some of the sort of resource needs within the sector to address this going forward? Can we compete in providing public benefit?
Marina, sure.
We can, from the point of view of, intellectual acumen, expertise, understanding, passion, problem-solving ability, intelligence, talent, dedication, but we cannot, considering the resources. And it's very ironic for me. I mean, I spend most of my life in the business world and technology and e-commerce. It's actually ironic to me to think that if Canada Helps was not a charity and I was able to access more capital, I would probably be able to do a lot more for the small charities that... So I think in this kind of blurring of the lines world, we cannot continue to view charities and investment in charities and their capacity and their ability to really adopt technology to invest as something that it's, well, we know it's desirable, but I don't know if we're really getting anywhere with it. I don't think the attitudes are changing despite, so many of us constantly talking about how they need to change. And honestly, I don't know how you change them, but yes, we can compete. But I cannot compete with some of these up-and-coming fundraising platforms. I mean, I have the trust of the charities, I have other assets, and thank God we're smart, and, we really work from the right place, which is a lot.
Okay, Conrad?
Well, I think Tim, you mentioned two things. What is important for us is trust, the trust Canadians have in us. I think that's a key thing. Innovation, ironically, we're talking about innovation and technology. One of the obstacles often in innovation are our own structures. And the fact that we look at our structures as being permanent, we have to be structured a certain way. Necessity enabled us to do the $50 million transfer because we didn't have another choice and we were capable of moving very fast. Now, to the outside world, it looked all good. There's an awful lot of duct tape holding all that stuff. Now we need to accelerate things afterwards. But I think a big part of it is we need to reorganize ourselves and not be the, sitting on the sideline when this technology, yes, so I think we can compete, but are we stuck in our own structures and not adjusting ourselves?
Eliana, c'est une question qui est très pertinente à l'expérience.
Yes, this is a very relevant question for United Way as well. Yes, I'll answer your question on trust. Yes, the reputation of an organization is very important. We see it in the surveys when there is trust. Often, the nonprofit organizations are the ones who make top of the list in terms of organizations in which Canadians trust. There's often a buzz around the name of the organization, and we're all interlinked. When there is scandal in one organization, we're all affected by it. I would like to answer the question on the matching funds. Whether it comes from government or another source, this leverage is always an incentive for donors. At United Way, we often have significant donors who will match other contributions. It's very important for the donor to know that this dollar will be doubled or tripled and will make a difference. There's also the tax incentives as well. In terms of technology, of course, if we work alone, we can't be competitive with the private sector. At United Way, we are trying to gather our efforts and resources because we know we won't do things individually. And this is the message I'm trying to convey. We are supporting hundreds of organizations in the Montreal area, and I tell them that they have to get together to maximize resources, otherwise we won't make it. Thank you, Nicole.
About technology and our ability to compete, one of the things we hear all the time from our clients who are charities is one of the biggest barriers is the need to invest in that. And there just is so much pressure on charities not to make those kinds of investments because it, of course, affects cost of fundraising and things like that. So that is a really, it's a big issue, but it's a bit like the elephant in the room because you can't do what we're talking about unless we make some sort of investment, and it's a real struggle for charities to do that.
J'ai reçu une question de nos amis.
I also have a question for those online. How do social media influence philanthropy? And this is a question we'll be asking the second panel. The changes for the new generation of donors.
Thank you. How much do you think that competition amongst ourselves is beneficial or harmful? You know, competition in the private sector is considered beneficial, makes us better, and I don't think we want a Stalinist single source charitable sector. So I'm just intrigued. It's something that I wonder because I've been known to compete with Conrad. I always lose, but.
I'll start. So as we've thought about this idea of competition, and it's not a word that we use a lot in the charitable sector because we don't like to think of ourselves in that way, of course. But at the end of the day, of course, we do. We do compete with each other for time and attention and resources. Where I have been struck a little bit on the competition question is that we now don't just compete with each other, we compete with things like what Marina talked about. And I know, again, this is a conversation Bruce and I have had on numerous occasions, that how we define giving is not necessarily how the donor is defining giving or Canadians are defining giving anymore. And so I remember the very first time I was struck by this was when there was a television show, Veronica Mars, and they couldn't find funding, and they went on a crowdfunding platform and they raised gobs and gobs of money in a really short period of time. And I remember it was on the CBC News. And it was funny to think, why was that on the news? But at any rate, and I remember I was driving and I thought, wow, that is a game changer for the charitable sector because no longer are we competing with charities only. We're competing with things like a movie, which it doesn't feel necessary. It feels like a gift to charity. So I'm not sure that really helps clarify anything. I think perhaps it just sort of further contextualizes or perhaps even muddies the water. But that's sort of a point on competition. And at the end of the day, I'll just finish by saying it is about that point about continuing to show our relevance and the need for what we are, and that linking it to the devaluing of expertise. We still need organizations like United Way and Red Cross. We can't survive without them. So I think there's something about that.
Anybody else on that?
If I look at, again, the recent event of Fort McMurray, I think, again, it's understanding where our added value is at the Red Cross and what the needs of people. So, and then we worked out a different form of relationship with the United Way in Fort McMurray, with the local organizations, with the food banks, and so on. So it brings us in another area. I want to make just one comment on, we're talking about technology, but I don't think it's really, technology is the tool. The big issue is our culture, our organizational cultures. And we found that out. It's you put the technology in. Technology brings another culture of how you work. If you don't address your organizational culture, it won't work. And so it's a different mindset on leveraging. I want to make another comment on technology. One of the biggest changes after that is the ability to have the information directly from those who need your help, as opposed to saying, I want to go.
Technology.
I talk too much. rather than going into an area and saying, think this is what the people need, we have all their information and then we tailor the support directly. That's a big change in terms of how you do things.
And I want to quickly just pick up the point about competition. Just as Conrad was talking about the relationship you built with other charities, we also hear about collaboration. Really, really big, important word that we're hearing from donors, and there's an opportunity in that for charities and for all of us that I don't think we've picked up enough on.
Okay, and question là-bas,
oui. I was interested in the comment, I think it was Marina, who said about how millennials are all about lateral and direct distribution of influence, and connecting that to ce que vous avez dit, Liliana, l'idée qu'il faut
with the importance of telling the story.
Connects back to trust with respect to what Conrad's experience in Fort McMurray. One question is just quite specific, which is, do you think there's a difference, for example, the Red Cross, with respect to what you have to do with vis-a-vis trust post-event or just generally as an institution, given that you're in the business of sort of this rapid disaster relief kind of moments that are very fast, escalate, and then also go down equally, versus perhaps the other wider area of philanthropy where you're talking about ongoing support to small charities that are doing work over time. So is there a difference, and do you manage that difference somehow? And also, how, going back to the comment about millennials, when they talk, one of the things that I think is very true is not only this lateralness, but this directness, and how can that be incorporated in your views to the trust and the raconter l'histoire aspects to actually maybe build that transparency that they look for, that authenticity that they look for, to essentially counter maybe the business model of the GoFundMe, people that are out there right now?
I think a lot will have to change, and I think we all need to be pressing on constantly. I mean, there are lots of good conversations in the sector, and to really not forget that we are the original social entrepreneurs. We are the social innovators. We are the social entrepreneurs. One of the things that I think is very, 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 very important, and again, we talk about it a lot, but I see it as almost like a critical element of so many things that are mentioned here, is really restructuring, remerchandising, repackaging what we do through the impact and effectiveness lens. Because one of the reasons that I think crowdfunding platforms are so popular is because so many people, and millennials actually to a large degree in several studies that I read, say that they really want to have the impact and they are concerned about, whether their money is reaching the recipients and whether it's effective. So paradoxically, they think that, donating on the crowdfunding platform is the solution for that. And on some level it is, right? Because they're connecting to a person directly. They know at the moment, they trust that their money will go to you. They know your story, and that feels good, right? That feels good because it's disintermediation. It's not like I'm giving money to some institution and then I have to trust them. I'm connecting to you. So I think that's incredibly powerful. Now, of all the crowdfunding dollars raised today, about a third does go to charities. And I think there is a huge opportunity because charities have, we can do this, right? I mean, it will take some skill and some thinking, but that is really one reason that I think crowdfunding has been successful, because it's removed that institution and it's put the person that you're helping to right in front. Now, of course, nobody thinks about the fact that that's not systemic change, that that's really just not good for everybody else, right? Like, people don't sit in front of the crowdfunding platform and think that at all, right? So let's just think about that. That's what we think here, right? But to the point that we can do this more, I think that we can be successful in using some of these newer platforms, combined with the trust and everything else, right?
Yeah, I think
it's working, Conrad. Yeah.
Yes, first of all, the Red Cross intervenes every 3 hours in supporting Canadians, so we're engaged on a daily basis with. So we're engaged all the time in supporting Canadians, but that's not visible. So we're to answer your question, we're engaged on an ongoing basis. I mean, I see three things all the time as really the value of the intangibles of the organization, not just the tangible. What the intangible is the value of the what it symbolizes for Canadians, which is essentially a conduit to help people. Are we answering that? And are we living up to that expectation in terms of trust? Our staff structure, the quality of our staff. And there's a third, and I feel like a presidential candidate there. I forgot my third.
And you know what happened to him?
My glasses on.
Juste ajouter pour les milléniaux.
I'd like to add in terms of millennials, and not just for millennials, people want to go through the experience. For them to write out a check is not the best way to contribute to society. Not only they want to give some of their time and it be time that is significant, but they want to do it socializing virtually and in reality, and they want to have fun doing so. We have to find the recipe that combines all these elements so that they give. But this is a process that is quite intense. Tim, if I may, I'd like to come back on the issue. It's an issue of relationship. When the Red Cross, when people give for Fort McMurray, for example, we have the responsibility of making sure that they've had a valuable experience and significant experience. And I think it's the same for millennials, for young people. If we don't make it a significant experience, they'll say, well, it's not worth it, I'll go elsewhere. So I think trust is built through experience.
We have enough here to go for the rest of the day. The panelists are going to be all with us through the break, through lunch. I encourage you to chase them down, ask the questions. I know it's frustrating when we have so much material now to follow up on, but we're going to go further. I mean, we've had already the beginnings of a discussion about what does the new generation think about giving? How do they do it? And we're going to go deeper into that in the second panel. So I would invite you now to take a 15-minute pause. We're going to start back here precisely at 10:30. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you.